Old San Francisco, which is the San Francisco of only the other day, the day before the earthquake, was divided midway by the Slot. The Slot was an iron crack that ran along the centre of Market Street, and from the Slot arose the burr of the ceaseless, endless cable that was hitched at will to the cars it dragged up and down. In truth, there were two slots. But in the quick grammar of the West, time was saved by calling them, and much more that they stood for, the Slot. North of the Slots were the theatres, hotels and shopping district, the banks and the staid, respectable business houses. South of the Slot were the factories, slums, laundries, machine shops, boiler works, and the abodes of the working class. The Slot was the metaphor that expressed the class cleavage of society, and no man crossed this metaphor back and forth more successfully than Freddie Drummond. He made a practice of living in both worlds, and in both worlds he lived singly well. Freddie Drummond was a professor in the sociology department of the University of California, and it was as the professor of sociology that he first crossed over the Slot, lived for 6 months in the great labour ghetto, and wrote The Unskilled Labourer, a book that was hailed everywhere as an able contribution to the literature of progress, and as a splendid reply to the literature of discontent. Politically and economically, it was nothing if not orthodox. Presidents of great railway systems bought whole editions of it to give to their employees. The Manufacturers' Association alone distributed 50,000 copies of it. In a way, it was almost as immoral as the far-famed and notorious Message to Garcia, while in its pernicious preachment of thrift and content, it ran Mr. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch a close second. At first, Freddie Drummond found it monstrously difficult to get along among the working people. He was not used to their ways, and they certainly were not used to his. They were suspicious. He had no antecedents. He could talk of no previous jobs. His hands were soft. His extraordinary politeness was ominous. His first idea of the role he would play was that of a free and independent American who chose to work with his hands and no explanations given. But it wouldn't do, as he quickly discovered. At the beginning they accepted him, very provisionally, as a freak. A little later, as he began to know his way about better, he insensibly drifted into the role that would work, namely, he was a man who had seen better days, very much better days, but who was down on his luck, though, to be sure, only temporarily. He learnt many things and generalized much and often erroneously, all of which can be found in the pages of The Unskilled Labourer. He saved himself, however, after the sane and conservative manner of his kind by labelling his generalizations as tentative. One of his first experiences was in the great Wilmax cannery, where he was put on piecework making small packing cases. A box factory supplied the parts, and all Freddie Drummond had to do was to fit the parts into a form and drive in the wire nails with a light hammer. It was not skilled labour, but it was piecework. The ordinary labourers in the cannery got $1.50 per day. Freddie Drummond found the other men on the same job with him jogging along and earning $1.75 a day. By the third day he was able to earn the same, but he was ambitious. He did not care to jog along and, being unusually able and fit, on the fourth day earned $2. The next day, having keyed himself up to an exhausting high tension, he earned $2.50. His fellow workers favoured him with scowls and black looks and made remarks, slangingly witty and which he did not understand, about sucking up to the boss and pacemaking and holding her down when the rains set in. He was astonished at their malingering on piecework, generalized about the inherent laziness of the unskilled labourer, and proceeded the next day to hammer out $3 worth of boxes. And that night, coming out of the cannery, he was interviewed by his fellow workmen, who were very angry and incoherently slangy. He failed to comprehend the motive behind their action. The action itself was strenuous. When he refused to ease down his pace and bleated about freedom of contract, independent Americanism, and the dignity of toil, they proceeded to spoil his pacemaking ability. It was a fierce battle, for Drummond was a large man and an athlete, but the crowd finally jumped on his ribs, walked on his face and stamped on his fingers, so that it was only after lying in bed for a week that he was able to get up and look for another job. All of which is duly narrated in that first book of his, in the chapter entitled The Tyranny of Labour. A little later, in another department of the Wilmax cannery, Lumping as a fruit distributor among the women, he essayed to carry 2 boxes of fruit at a time, and it was promptly reproached by the other fruit lumpers. It was palpable malingering, but he was there. He decided not to change conditions, but to observe. So he lumped 1 box thereafter, and so well did he study the art of shirking that he wrote a special chapter on it, with the last several paragraphs devoted to tentative generalizations. In those 6 months he worked at many jobs and developed into a very good imitation of a genuine worker. He was a natural linguist, and he kept notebooks, making a scientific study of the workers' slang or argot, until he could talk quite intelligibly. This language also enabled him more intimately to follow their mental processes, and thereby to gather much data for a projected chapter in some future book, which he planned to entitle Synthesis of Working Class Psychology. Before he arose to the surface from that first plunge into the underworld, he discovered that he was a good actor and demonstrated the plasticity of his nature. He was himself astonished at his own fluidity. Once having mastered the language and conquered numerous fastidious qualms, he found that he could flow into any nook of working-class life and fit it so snugly as to feel comfortably at home. As he said in the preface to his second book, The Toiler, he endeavoured really to know the working people, and the only possible way to achieve this was to work beside them, eat their food, sleep in their beds, be amused with their amusements, think their thoughts, and feel their feeling. He was not a deep thinker. He had no faith in new theories. All his norms and criteria were conventional. His thesis on the French Revolution was noteworthy in college annals, not merely for its painstaking and voluminous accuracy, but for the fact that it was the driest, deadest, most formal and most orthodox screed ever written on the subject. He was a very reserved man, and his natural inhibition was large in quantity and steel-like in quality. He had but few friends. He was too undemonstrative, too frigid. He had no vices, nor had anyone ever discovered any temptations. Tobacco he detested, beer he abhorred, and he was never known to drink anything stronger than occasional light wine at dinner. When a freshman he had been baptized, iceboxed, by his warmer-blooded fellows. As a member of the faculty he was known as Cold Storage. He had but one grief, and that was Freddie. He had earned it when he played fullback in the Varsity 11, and his formal soul had never succeeded in living it down. Freddie he would ever be, except officially, and through nightmare vistas he looked into a future when his world would speak of him as Old Freddie. For he was very young to be a doctor of sociology, only 27, and he looked younger. In appearance and atmosphere he was a strapping big college man, smooth-faced and easy-mannered, clean and simple and wholesome, with a known record for being a splendid athlete and an implied vast possession of cold culture in the inhibited sort. He never taught shop out of class and committee rooms except later on, when his books showered him with distasteful public notice, and he yielded to the extent of reading occasional papers before certain literary and economic societies. He did everything right, too right, and in dress and comportment was inevitably correct. Not that he was a dandy, far from it. He was a college man, in dress and carriage as like as a pea to the type of that late years is being so generously turned out of our institutions of higher learning. His handshake was satisfyingly strong and stiff. His blue eyes were coldly blue and convincingly sincere. His voice, firm and masculine, clean and crisp of enunciation, was pleasant to the ear. The one drawback to Freddie Drummond was his inhibition. He never unbent. In his football days, the higher the tension of the game, the cooler he grew. He was noted as a boxer, but he was regarded as an automaton. With the inhuman precision of a machine judging distance and time blows, guarding, blocking and stalling, he was rarely punished himself, while he rarely punished an opponent. He was too clever and too controlled to permit himself to put a pound more weight into a punch than he intended. With him it was a matter of exercise. It kept him fit. As time went by, Freddie Drummond found himself more frequently crossing the slot and losing himself in South Market. His summer and winter holidays were spent there, and, whether it was a week or a weekend, he found time spent to be valuable and enjoyable. There was so much material to be gathered. His third book, Mass and Master, became a textbook in the American universities, and almost before he knew it, he was at work on a fourth one, The Fallacy of the Inefficient. Somewhere in his makeup there was a strange twist or quirk. Perhaps it was a recoil from his environment and training, or from the tempered seed of his ancestors who had been bookmen, generation preceding generation. But at any rate, he found joy in being down in the working class world. In his own world he was cold storage, but down below he was Big Bill Tots, who could drink and smoke and slang and fight and be an all-round favourite. Everybody liked Bill, and more than one working girl made love to him. At first he had been merely a good actor, but as time went on, simulation became second nature. He no longer played a part, and he loved sausages and bacon, than which, in his own proper sphere, there was nothing more loathsome in the way of food. From doing the thing for the need's sake, he came to doing the thing for the thing's sake. He found himself regretting as the time drew near for him to go back to his lecture room and his inhibition. And he often found himself waiting with anticipation for the dreamy time to pass when he could cross the slot and cut loose and play the devil. He was not wicked, but as Big Bill Tots he did a myriad things that Freddie Drummond would never have been permitted to do. Moreover, Freddie Drummond would never have wanted to do them. That was the strangest part of this discovery. Freddie Drummond and Bill Tots were two totally different creatures. The desires and tastes and impulses of each ran counter to the other's. Bill Tots could shirk at a job with clear conscience, while Freddie Drummond condemned shirking as vicious, criminal, and un-American, and devoted whole chapters to condemnation of the vice. Freddie Drummond did not care for dancing, but Bill Tots never missed the nights at the various dancing clubs such as the Magnolia, the Western Star, and the Elite, while he won a massive silver cup standing 30 inches high for being the best sustained character at the Butchers and Meatworkers' annual Grand Masked Ball. And Bill Tots liked the girls, and the girls liked him, while Freddie Drummond enjoyed playing the ascetic in this particular, was open in his opposition to equal suffrage, and cynically better in his secret condemnation of coeducation. Freddie Drummond changed his manners with his dress, and without effort. When he entered the obscure little room used for his transformation scenes, he carried himself just a bit too stiffly. He was too erect, his shoulders were an inch too far back, while his face was grave, almost harsh, and practically expressionless. But when he emerged in Bill Tots' clothes, he was another creature. Bill Tots did not slouch, but somehow his whole form limbered up and became graceful. The very sound of the voice was changed, and the laugh was loud and hearty, while loose speech and an occasional oath were as a matter of course on his lips. Also, Bill Tots was a trifle inclined to late hours, and at times in saloons to be good-naturedly bellicose with other workmen. Then, too, at Sunday picnics or when coming home from the show, either arm betrayed a practiced familiarity in stealing around girls' waists. He displayed a wit keen and delightful in the flirtatious badinage that was expected of a good fellow in his class. So thoroughly was Bill Tots himself, so thoroughly a workman, a genuine denizen of south of the slot, that he was as class conscious as the average of this kind, and his hatred for a scab even exceeded that of the average loyal Union man. During the waterfront strike, Freddie Drummond was somehow able to stand apart from the unique combination and, coldly critical, watch Bill Tots hilariously slug scab longshoremen. For Bill Tots was a dues-paying member of the Longshoremen Union, and had a right to be indignant with the usurpers of his job. Big Bill Tots was so very big and so very able that it was Big Bill to the front when trouble was brewing. From acting outraged feelings, Freddie Drummond, in the role of his other self, came to experience genuine outrage, and it was only when he returned to the classic atmosphere of the university that he was able, sanely and conservatively, to generalize upon his underworld experiences and put them down on paper as a trained sociologist should. That Bill Tots lacked the perspective to raise him above class consciousness, Freddie Drummond clearly saw. But Bill Tots could not see it. When he saw a scab taking his job away, he saw red at the same time, and little else did he see. It was Freddie Drummond, irreproachably clothed and comported, seated at his sturdy desk or facing his class in Sociology 17, who saw Bill Tots, and all around Bill Tots, and all around the whole scab and union labour problem and its relation to the economic welfare of the United States in the struggle for the world market. Bill Tots really wasn't able to see beyond the next meal and the prize fight the following night at the Gaiety Athletic Club.